to look at negative radicals. So let's just start simple. What is the square root of 16? 4. Everyone can agree on that, right? Okay. Now let's compare that to the square root of negative 16. Square root of negative 16. Any guesses? Huh? 4 times dot I. Okay. So let's break this down. I can look at the square root of 16 as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. Because if I want to combine them back together, negative 1 times 16 is negative 16. Are you okay with that? Okay, so I just separated the two. Do you know what the square root of 16 is? 4. Right? We've already done that. So really, you need to know what the square root of negative 1 is. What's the square root of negative 1? Go ahead, plug it into your calculator. It says error in your calculator, right? Because the square root of negative 1 is I. It's an imaginary number. What? I don't know, that's how I write it. You can write, you don't have to do the little loop. Like you can just write an I. I don't care how you do it. Because it's imaginary. So we're going to deal with imaginary numbers a little bit in IM2 and more so later in the semester. This is kind of just a surface. You are going to deal with imaginaries a ton in IM3. Okay? So negative 1, the square root of negative 1 is I. Our answer then for the square root of negative 16 is 4I. We kind of put it in the place of a variable. So the I comes after your coefficient. So let's make a note. The square root of negative 1 is I, and that just stands for imaginary. Square root of negative 1 is I. Now, I'm not going to ask you to, we are initially going to break it down like this. Eventually, you're just going to see a negative inside of a square root, and you're not going to break it down. You're just going to know it becomes I. Okay. So let's start with the square root of negative 32. So the square root of negative 32 breaks down to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 32. I'm just separating it so it looks more like what we've been dealing with. What is the square root of negative 1? I. Square root of negative 1 is I. How do I find the square root of 32? Factor tree. Give me two numbers that multiply to 32. 16 and 2, okay? And 16 breaks down to 4 and 4. So I have a pair of 4s, and I have a leftover 2. So 4 square root of 2, I know is the square root of 32. Where do you think I'm going to place the I? Where do you think the I is going to go? Okay, where? In front of the 4 or after the 4? After the 4. It's going to be used like a variable. So your answer is going to be 4I square root of 2. Yes, sir.
Is your I always on the outside? Never on the inside?
It's always going to be on the outside because you're pulling out that negative. So that negative 1 makes it an I on the outside. That's a good question. So don't ever put the I on the inside of the radical. Okay? All right, let's try. Do you have a question, Bryce? Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Square root of 124. Do you want to try it or do you want me to do it with you? You think you got it? Okay, you try it. Okay. So I have the square root of -1 times the square root of 124. What are two numbers that multiply to 124? 4 and 31. 62 and 2 also works. And then you're going to break down 62. Okay. It all is going to give you the same answer. I have a pair of 2's. The square root of 1 becomes I. So I have 2I square root of 31 as my final answer. Are we okay with that? Okay, so let's add a piece. It's not a hard piece. We can do this. Do we need to do it together? Yeah? Okay, we'll do this one together and you can do the next one by yourself. It's harder. Here we go. I'm not going to separate it because I see a negative and I know it's going to be an I. Right? Okay, let's break down 72. What multiplies to 72? Okay. 6 breaks down to 2 and 3. 12 is 3 and 4. And then 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 3's and a pair of 2's. And I have the I that's coming out. So 2 times 3 is 6. I have the I. And what's my leftovers? What do I have left over? 2. Someone said what happened to the 5. I haven't gotten there yet. This 5 now multiplies out front. So 30I square root of 2 should have been your final answer. You like this lesson? Great. You'll like this problem.
It's kind of compared to the last one. No, it's more easy.
Okay, here you go. Try this one. All right, last one. I have a negative, which I know is going to be an I. I break down the 45 to 9 and 5, and then 3 and 3. So I have a pair of 3's. I have 2 X's and a Y. So I have a pair of X's and a leftover Y. I also have a leftover 5. Right? So 3X square root of 5Y. I also have this -5 to deal with. So -15X square root of 5. Y, where am I going to put the I? Goes after the X. So a lot of you put it first, probably because of alphabetical order, right? No? Oh, you just put it in the middle. Okay. The I goes at the end. Alphabetical order? Yes. Okay, questions? Questions, comments, concerns? No?